recruiting activities and has enjoyed success with programs like the Future Soldier Preparatory Course. However, I am concerned that the administration efforts to limit who serves and in what roles they may serve could have a chilling effect on recruiting and retention. There is room in the Army for all qualified volunteers. This includes at the United States Military Academy, where recent efforts to stifle education and narrow the student body represents an assault on merit and inclusion. Indeed, contrary to many of the administration's claims, I would argue that the current American soldiers and West Point cadets are some of the finest who have ever served. And I'm interested in your thoughts on this issue. Finally, I've recently visited a number of Army posts, including in Germany, Korea, Guam, and throughout the continental United States. I've been impressed by the work our soldiers and Army civilians are doing to not only train and equip warfighters, but also to incorporate lessons and knowledge from our foreign partners, including the tens of thousands of Ukrainians who have conducted training in Grafenwehr. As Ukraine's recent and indeed revolutionary drone operation deep within Russia demonstrates, the future of combat and UAS warfare in particular is evolving at a breathtaking speed. The Ukrainian drone operation should serve as a clarion call for every commander at every level about how they plan to protect their forces and installations at home and abroad at all times. I'd like to know what lessons and tactics the Army is learning from the conflicts in Europe and the Middle East, and again, I thank the witnesses for their participation today, and I look forward to the testimonies. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Senator Reed. We'll proceed now with opening statements. Secretary Driscoll, you may go first.
Chairman Wicker, Ranking Member Reed, distinguished members of this committee, it is a privilege to address you today. I want to express my sincere gratitude for your unwavering support of our soldiers and their families. I'd like to start off this hearing with some good news. Earlier this week, the United States Army met its fiscal year 2025 recruiting goals 4 months early, bringing in more than 61,000 new recruits. These men and women are stepping up during a time of global uncertainty and complex threats. And those threats are real. When I went through my confirmation hearings in this very room, I pledged to be the Soldiers' Secretary of the Army. That commitment has guided our approach every step of the way. The Army Transformation Initiative has been conceived with the soldier in mind, and your partnership is critical as General George and I begin implementing this transformation, which is now more urgent than ever. This week, we witnessed a stark illustration of modern warfare in Ukraine and Russia. Reports indicate a coordinated strike against Russia's strategic bomber force using a swarm of over 100 inexpensive drones. At a cost of a mere tens of thousands of dollars, Ukraine inflicted billions in damage, potentially setting back Russia's bomber capabilities for years. The world saw in real time how readily available technology can disrupt established power dynamics. Drones are but one example of a broader shift, and the Army needs to keep pace. In my first 3 months as Secretary, General George and I have immersed ourselves in understanding why the Army has been slow to innovate. Our soldiers are not the problem. I've met with them in the Middle East, Europe, along the southern border, and at installations across the United States. Their strength, dedication, and unwavering commitment to this nation are inspiring. We ask a great deal of them, and they consistently deliver. Nor is the ingenuity of American industry at fault. Our tech sector continues to thrive, driven by innovation, entrepreneurship, and a willingness to embrace risk. So where does the problem lie? As Secretary, I have found that the Army has become calcified, having suffered from years of inefficiency, slow-moving processes, and wasteful spending. Program lobbyists and bureaucrats have overtaken the Army's ability to prioritize soldiers and warfighting. We must all work together to ensure the Army is ready to fight and win. The Army Transformation Initiative will make us into an Army that is lean, agile, and relentlessly focused on empowering its soldiers. An Army that embraces innovation, collaborates effectively with the private sector, and prioritizes warfighting readiness above all else. To achieve this vision, we must streamline our acquisitions process, reclaim our right to repair, and cultivate a culture that rewards innovation and calculated risk-taking. We must empower those closest to the fight to make the decisions. The Army Transformation Initiative is a first step to achieve this vision. But this transformation hinges on your support. We are asking this committee to empower us to make these changes while providing your constitutionally mandated oversight. We are asking for the flexibility to make decisions that keep pace with the rapid advancements in technology and the evolving nature of warfare. We are asking for this committee to work with us to maximize the value of every dollar appropriated to best support our soldiers. I ask this because it is my duty, both as the Secretary of the Army and as an American citizen, to ensure that every dollar that the Army receives contributes to defending this great nation of ours. I know we are all committed to our soldiers, to their success, and to providing them with the overwhelming advantage that they deserve. Thank you, and I welcome your questions.
Thank you very much, Secretary Driscoll. General George, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chairman. Chairman Wicker, Ranking Member Reed, distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to talk with you today and take your questions. I want to start off by saying that I'm extremely proud of our Army. I'm proud of our troops that are out in the Indo-Pacific, on the southern border, in the Middle East, in Europe, and everything our Army has done over the past year to respond to wildfires, floods, and a bridge collapse. We have formations all around the world conducting missions and exercises and innovating with our partners and allies. When not deployed, our units are conducting tough, realistic training at their home stations and our combat training centers. Our Army is a professional team that remains focused on its warfighting mission, and young Americans want to be a part of it. This is evidenced by our strong recruiting numbers this year, and I would also add very strong retention numbers. Just a couple of days ago, as the Secretary mentioned, we've met our recruiting mission for the year, and we still have our most productive months ahead of us. And while I'm proud of our Army, I also know we have work to do. We know the world is changing. Commercial technology is rapidly evolving, especially AI and autonomous systems, and this is impacting the character of war. We understand that we must transform to stay ahead of our adversaries, and we need to get better by 2026 and 2027, not by 2030. Over the last year, using existing FY24 funding, some of our units transformed in contact, which means they experimented with changing how we train, fight, man, and equip while they were deployed or in training environments. This was a great proof of concept. It confirmed that our formations are capable of rapidly improving their lethality. One transformation in contact brigade in Europe was 300% more effective in lethal targeting in training. Transformation in contact taught us some valuable lessons about what our Army should be buying and how we should be buying it, and we are just getting started. We're going to make these changes we can at our level so that we can continue to dominate the modern battlefield. For instance, canceling programs that are obsolete are not what our warfighters need. Developing and adapting war-winning capabilities and buying modular, open architecture designs that can be iteratively updated. Cutting and consolidating headquarters. For instance, we're going to reduce GO structure, cut 1,000 positions from our own staff here in DC, and add in modern business systems that will make us more effective. And finally, we will power down authorities and funding so that commanders in our fighting formations have what they need to make their teams and their communities successful. What I've learned from being in this seat is that our job as leaders is to do what we can with the budget that we have. I've been talking about the need for agile funding for UAS, counter-UAS, and EW. We need flexibility in those areas and many more. Technology is changing too rapidly. We've got to be able to buy capabilities rather than specific programs so that we can always get our warfighters the best available tech and equipment for the fight. And this is where we could use your help. We are quickly approaching our Army's 250th birthday. This will defend has been our motto for 250 years, and I'm looking forward to celebrating our long legacy of duty. More importantly, our soldiers are ready today to defend our country, and we will do our part to ensure they have what they need to be successful in that enduring mission. And Chairman and Ranking Member, we look forward to taking your questions on how important the OIB is to us, how specifically we're going to transform, and what lessons we're learning from the conflicts today. Thank you for your support.
Thank you, General, and thank you for mentioning the anniversary and birthday, which is quite significant for this nation and very personally significant to a number of members of this committee. So thank you very much. we're rolling out the, and did roll out some very specific information about the reconciliation bill in just the last day or two. This bill has been developed with hand and glove consultation with the administration and with our colleagues in the House of Representatives. It's one of the least controversial sections of the reconciliation bill. However, much of the funding in the Defense Reconciliation Bill, because the rules, has to be unspecific and will technically be at the discretion of the Department of Defense, though we'll write recommendations for them. So I need a quick yes or no from each of you, particularly based on the fact that this has been written in consultation and with changes made to accommodate the administration. Do you commit, Mr. Secretary, first, to follow Congress's spending recommendations in the Defense Reconciliation Bill unequivocally?
Yes.
General George.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. And that's been the answer to by all of our witnesses. The organic industrial base, ammunition plants, depots, arsenals remain vital to sustaining combat operations. We've read, Mr. Secretary, in your ATI memo about potential closure of Pine Bluff Arsenal, Bluegrass Army Depot, Red River Army Depot. In light of the fact that we're going to be so focused on reindustrialization, I would caution that we be very careful about that. Are you planning to propose closing these three facilities, Mr. Secretary?
Chairman, we are creating a plan to look at what we can do with them, with shifting work from them as one of the options. I think General George and I stand hand in hand with you, acknowledging that our organic industrial base is not sufficient for the threats today or in the future. I think spending is constrained as it should be. We owe that to the American taxpayer. We are working on plans that could use those facilities for other purposes, but if the funding does not come and it has to come from the rest of the budget, I think our current belief is that those dollars at our current budgeted level would be best suited somewhere else.
Well, I hope we'll continue to have a meaningful dialogue there as the body that's constitutionally charged with the power of the purse. And it may be that our need for reindustrialization will tie in quite well with actually continuing to utilize these. Now, you mentioned drones, and we sure have learned a lot in the last 5 or 6 days about small, inexpensive drones. I don't know if most people realize that our drone manufacturers create drones that cost 10 times as much as Chinese drones. DoD is spending less than $100 million per year on small drones. It seems to me this makes it difficult for our industrial base to achieve economies of scale and buying the equipment to produce at a more reasonable price. Do you agree with me on that? And do you agree that we very much need to address this issue, Mr. Secretary? And then I'll ask General George to comment also.
I think, Chairman, if it was only if we were only 10x more expensive, I would say that would be better than the actual reality, which I think we are sometimes 50 times to 100 times more expensive. We are so expensive that it just makes the cost curve absolutely impossible for us. And so I wholeheartedly agree that we as a nation have got to set a moonshot to figure out both how do we defend against these low-cost drones, and then how do we create enough to scale against Russia. It's estimated maybe creating 4 to 6 million this year. I mean, and China even more. I think the last number I saw is they might be doing 50 million across their entire country. We are currently not ready for it, but we need to work with you to get to speed up the current tests that we are doing.
Joe George, I assume that you and the Secretary are of one mind on this issue.
We certainly are, Chairman. I would, there's two aspects of this. To your previous comment on the, industrial base, I think that that's something, again, you look at like DJI is producing 15 million drones. One of the challenges for us, like brushless motors, controllers, things like that, that I think that this is where we need to move to in our own industrial base and be able to do that. It could help commercial industry here stateside as well. So that's one aspect. The other thing,
millions of people are listening to you on television. Tell them what DJI is.
It's a PRC company that makes drones, 15 million drones. And again, we need the parts, and we could produce that here. And the second thing that I would add, Chairman, is that I think this is why it's important that we have that we buy in portfolios, the brigade capability portfolios. The program of record is, that we wouldn't buy the same drone was one that we've canceled, 25-year-old drones. We know that those are updating. And so we could, I think, in UAS, counter UAS and EW, we need to have the flexibility. We can come over here. We certainly want the oversight and explain what systems we're buying. But this is an area that is rapidly transforming and adapting, and we need to be able to maintain pace with that and have the flexibility to do it.
Thank you, sir. Senator Reid.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Let me begin with a tragic incident that happened on January 29th of this year. 67 people were lost when a U.S. Army Black Hawk helicopter collided with a PSA airline flight 5342. Obviously, it was a tragic moment. In the intervening weeks and months, as investigations are ongoing, family members have expressed to me significant concerns by the lack of transparency and direct communication with the Army, specifically Army senior leaders. And Secretary Driscoll, does the Army commit to establish a direct communication with these families? I think it's fair and necessary.
Senator, the incident on that day is a tragedy. Our hearts go out to the victims and their families. The Army is doing everything we can to learn from the incident to ensure that it never occurs again. There is obviously an investigation and lawsuits ongoing, and the best advice we've received from counsel to date is to let those play out. And so that's our current position, Senator.
No, I understand that, but I think just reaching out in a very clearly non-substantive way, but in a compassionate way, that the Army understands their grief and we're doing all we can, without obviously specifying, would be appropriate. I do understand that the National Transportation Safety Board and the Army is conducting investigations, but General George, could you briefly describe the changes that you've already made to improve the safety in that zone?
Yes, sir. I mean, I think, again, we've been cooperating fully with the National Transportation Safety Board and had our own folks in here. The biggest thing is the flight routes have completely changed, and that was a decision that was made, that the route that was, I believe it's Route 4 that's past there, that is closed off. Immediately we made adjustments, and I will, with people that are coming in right now, there's very, very few flights that come in and out of the Pentagon. I would tell you that, we do, and you're aware of the mission. We still have a mission to do. So, our formations need to continue to make sure that they're doing that. Right. But also that, the changes that we've done with making sure that ADSB and that there's constant communication. So again, we're working very closely with the FAA, both locally and then nationally, to make sure that that we learn from this. And learning means changing, and that's what we're doing.
No, I appreciate that. But again, I think on a human level, some contact with the families would be more than appropriate. Mr. Secretary, the New York Times recently reported that the Department of Homeland Security asked for over 20,000 20,000 National Guard forces to conduct interior immigration enforcement. Have you been asked to prepare for this requirement?
We have.
Immigration enforcement in the interior of the United States is unprecedented for the National Guard. And the scale of assistance that they're asking for is equally unprecedented. Diverting 20,000 guardsmen to this role, first of all, they're not trained for it. It'll necessarily pull those persons away from their jobs, their families. But more importantly, I think it's going to divert them from their more traditional role, disaster relief, supporting local emergencies. And we know that there's likely to be a very strenuous hurricane season, which I'm told begins on June 1st. From which states would the Army be pulling these troops?
I'll jump in. I don't, we are working through this right now, and obviously we'll get asked to provide soldiers. You know, we're ready to do that. We are, I will tell you, sir, prepared to respond to emergencies. That we've, done that routinely. I mentioned that in my opening statement on what we're able to do across all the compos, and then with whatever missions that we're aligned to do, those, clerical or whatever, they would be aligned to whatever the soldiers are trained
Is
to
this
do.
a mission that, in your experience, that National Guardsmen have been trained for, going and searching for illegal immigrants in major cities and across the country?
Again, Senator, I think that, the missions would be aligned with what our soldiers are trained to do within the authorities that we would have under Title 10.
Do we have a cost estimate yet of how much it would cost to deploy 20,000 National Guards?
Senator, I don't believe we do, but we'll follow up with your office the moment we know what states and an estimated cost.
Just finally, we recognize that both legally and traditionally soldiers are not police officers or ICE agents. Much of what they do lies outside of this law enforcement environment. Just, are you concerned about the scene of U.S. Army, and people won't make distinction between National Guard and U.S. Army, driving in military vehicles and pulling people out of houses and putting them in the backs of trucks and driving them away? I don't think that's the image the Army has strove for 250 years to create.
Senator, I don't, it's hard to answer that hypothetical because we have not heard of those details in the planning. And so it's hard to answer today.
So if you were directed to begin to seize people, put them in trucks and drive them away, you would object because that is inconsistent with the Army of the United States?
Again, Senator, it's hard to answer that hypothetical. We have no one has asked that question.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the extra time.
Thank you, Senator Reed. Senator Fisher.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary General, welcome. The Army was already undergoing significant changes prior to the April 30th letter from the Secretary of Defense. I understand that we've had some success in increasing experimentation and getting soldier feedback early in the acquisition process. This results in more intuitive capabilities, easier for soldiers to use. How does the Army Transformation Initiative build on the transformation in contact efforts so that technology can be delivered into the hands of the soldiers faster?
Senator,
Mr. Secretary.
It is all built off transformation and contact, and all built in as many instances as humanly possible off what soldiers have actually told us. So if you look at what the most successful small, medium, and large businesses in America do, particularly if you looked at the venture capital backed ones, what they would have is this concept called minimum viable product, which is this idea that if you have an idea, get a prototype as quickly as possible and get it to your end user. And what we have tried to do, and what the Army has done really well, I think, or I hope, is to get things we are testing into the hands of our soldiers as fast as possible. General George and I were with an autonomous software company that designs essentially the software for autonomous vehicles about a month and a half, 2 months ago at this point, and we saw what they had. We asked if they had ever put in an Army vehicle. They said no. We got them a vehicle 5 days later. 10 days later, they sent us a video fully automating our Humvee and our ISV. We got it in the hands of soldiers all within 3 or 4 weeks, and we're currently learning from that. And so that, to us, is how we will actually quickly innovate and change our Army to face today's threats.
Will you tie in the command and control to that as well? Are you working with any specific private industry to be able to do that?
Senator, we're working with a bunch of companies that are doing that. Again, for all of this, I think what we're learning is we're going to have to pass data very rapidly. So, I think the network to us is foundational to everything we do. If you're going to sense, you have to decide, and whatever you're going to do to act, the network is central to that. I wanted to just add on the lessons. Besides just the equipment, for us, the biggest change is actually having developers that are right there with our soldiers to see what works. We're seeing what the battery life in a cold environment versus the humidity that's out there right now in the Pacific. So we're seeing those. We're changing how we're organized. We know you can be seen anywhere on this planet. How we're going to reorganize our formations, we're learning that. And how do we better train our soldiers to operate in EW environments? How do we better train FPV operators? All of that. And again, we have to constantly, we're in the continuous transformation mode.
Okay, thank you. We saw a long-range hypersonic weapons test in June and December of last year, and I was encouraged by the success of those tests. Do you still anticipate, Mr. Secretary and General, fielding that capability by the end of fiscal year 25?
We do, and one of the things we're also excited about is we're testing a new version of it that is 1/10 the cost, and we think has even better attributes. And so it would be early to know whether it will work, but we're optimistic.
In your written testimony, you highlight that the Army's mid-range capability system, it's been deployed in the Philippines since April, I think, of last year. Can you provide us with an update on that program and when you expect additional batteries to be fielded?
Again, Senator, that's another thing. We're looking at a total of 5 batteries, and what we're also doing with that is same thing with continuous transformation. How do we make those systems smaller? How do we tie them in better? How do we make them so that they're more mobile? That's what we're working on.
As you're testing these different capabilities, these new capabilities, do you have some of these businesses, you said they were alongside soldiers and being able to see the real-time effects. So as you're testing these things in real time, and you understand the field battle that you may be facing in the very near future, are you also soliciting not just comments from industry, but also to continue to solicit those comments from soldiers as well? And have you been able to make changes in any of these capabilities that you're currently testing?
Yeah, we both wanted to push it, put the
you're
trigger
going,
on that one. We have done that. I get one of the things, for example, that soldiers said, "Hey, listen, it would be better to have an autonomous system." Or an optionally manned vehicle that could move around and could do those things. Hey, we need the command and control, piece of this to be smaller and more mobile. And so we're making those changes. And we've had companies that have actually gone out, and this is about leveraging commercial industry to do this, that have made, those vehicles and then brought them out to our formations, and we're testing them. And again, getting them to our soldiers is the most important thing we can do.
Great, thank you. The chairman's going to gavel you out, Mr. Secretary. Thank you very much.
Of course, witnesses can supplement their answers. Senator Shaheen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, General George, thank you both for being here. I want to follow up on Senator Reed's question about the role of the National Guard in dealing with illegal immigrants and I'm looking at a memo here from the Executive Secretary at the Department of Defense from the Department of Homeland Security. And one of the things they say in this memo is that they're asking the National Guard to up to 3,500 personnel to support field investigative units for high-priority fugitive cases, joint task force operations for absconder fugitive tracking, surveillance and canvassing missions, data analysis and call center support, and night operations and rural interdiction. That doesn't sound hypothetical to me, Mr. Secretary. That sounds like that is a direct request that has already been made to the Department of Defense, and I assume you might have seen it from the Department of Homeland Security to engage in those operations. It also says that the Army is not going to be, or the Department of Defense is not going to be reimbursed for those operations. So do you know who's going to pay for those and what account from the Department of Defense that those operations would come from?
Senator, I don't know what account sitting here right now, but we can follow up with your office.
Well, I would hope that if first of all, I share Senator Reid's concerns about asking the National Guard to engage in those kinds of operations. As a former governor, I can tell you that I didn't want our National Guard going off to do something when we needed them at home in New Hampshire. But I would also be very concerned about who's paying for those. And the Department of Homeland Security, if they're going to engage in these operations, then they ought to be footing the bill, not asking the Department of Defense and the Army or anybody else in the National Guard to do that. So let me just register my grave concern, Mr. Chairman, about that. I want to go on to another topic at this point, and that is a lot of the discussion so far has been about the changing role of conflict and war. And one of the places where I think we're seeing those operations very dramatically is in the information warfare systems arena. And so I'm concerned about the Army's decision last year to reduce nearly 3,000 Special Operation Forces personnel. Most of those were from Military Information Support Operations, MISO, and this comes at a time when we're looking at expanded operations on the part of Russia, on the part of China, our adversaries. I sit on the Foreign Relations Committee. We had a hearing earlier this year that pointed out that China is spending over $1 billion a year on disinformation operations around the world. And so it feels to me like we're unilaterally disarming in this arena at a time when we should be engaging and thinking about how to do that. So I wonder, General George, from an operational perspective, does SOCOM have the ability to replace those positions, and how are you thinking about information warfare?
First, on the information warfare, Senator, I completely agree with you. I mean, that is something, and I think rather than what we've been talking about looking at specific formations, we're also looking, we have a bunch of specialties that we have had around for 20 or 30 years. And like I think anybody does in the commercial sector, you have to make, you have to adapt and change and make sure that you're doing that. So the cuts were made, and this was, worked with U.S. Army Special Operations Command and SOCOM, were print media, leaflet drops, people that were doing those kinds of things. And I would argue that the world has changed, and what we should be doing, we should be focused on it. In the meantime, we have grown cyber capability, and how we're going to do that, through technology, I think is important. And I think the other thing that we've learned is that we're going to have this kind of capability throughout our formation. It's less about headquarters. It's about having capabilities at echelon throughout all of our formations. We're all living, it's you're not going to give just a certain people a capability, because we're all going to have to operate on this very complex battlefield, and that's what we're looking at. So we just had a discussion about this. I'd love to come over and talk to you about this more in detail on what we're looking at and how we're going to embed this across our formation.
I would very much enjoy seeing a plan for how that's going to be done, because I think that's one of the most serious disadvantages we have right now. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very, very much. Senator Cotton.
Gentlemen, welcome. I was at Fort Myer yesterday, as the Old Guard recognized several persons as honorary members of the regiment for their critical work in getting the caisson platoon back up to limited operations, and also for their work at the Carter State Funeral, where the caisson platoon and its horses and horsemen so well represented the Army and the nation. And I want to thank you both for your work on getting the caisson platoon back in operation and on the path towards full operation very soon. Secretary Driscoll, I want to turn to the munitions crisis that our nation faces. President Trump recently said we need to take a long, hard look at defense procurement and our defense industrial base because it's been withering down to nothing. Given all the money we spend on the Pentagon, it's unacceptable that we would ever run out of ammunition or be unable to quickly produce the weapons we need. You also acknowledged our munitions crisis at your confirmation hearing. You said one of the greatest problems facing our time is getting our munitions and getting our magazines back up to where they need to be. I assume 3 months on to the job, you still believe that addressing the nation's munitions crisis is vital if we are to deter and, if necessary, fight and win a war against China?
Absolutely, Senator, and I would even update and say it is, after 100 days of seeing it, it is worse than I thought at my confirmation hearing.
Thank you. So do I and most members of the committee. That's one reason why I was pleased to see that the Army Transformation Initiative focuses on arsenals, ammunition plants, and depots, your organic industrial base. Secretary Hegseth's memo about the initiative directs the Army to modernize the organic industrial base to generate the ammunition stockpiles necessary to sustain national defense during wartime by implementing 21st century production capabilities. Given this and your earlier remarks, Senator Wicker, I think it's safe to say that we share the Secretary's belief that the organic industrial base is a crucial element of our broader defense industrial base. You agree?
Unequivocally.
Thank you. And we're not the only ones either. There's other members of this committee like Senator Mullen and Senator Ernst and Senator Rosen who have long pushed the Army to strengthen its organic industrial base. That includes updating and expanding operations at facilities like Pine Bluff Arsenal in my state, McAllister Army Ammunition Plant in Oklahoma, Hawthorne Army Depot in Nevada. All these facilities, like all of them across the organic industrial base, are underused, and we have thought for some time the Army should be expanding them to meet urgent national security needs. And while I agree with you that the commercial industry will play an important role in solving the crisis, I think we all know that industry alone can't do it all. First, I'm doubtful that private businesses are going to take up work like smoke grenades or other niche capabilities required by the military. For instance, I'm skeptical that it's profitable for a business to stand up new production of white phosphorus ammunition, which is only produced in Pine Bluff, when the customer base is limited to the U.S. military and the cost of production are so high. Just some rough back-of-the-envelope calculations I've made suggest it would cost around $500 million to replicate that capacity. And second, I think we've also learned pretty definitively over the last 3 years of the Ukraine war that our commercial industrial base, while vital, simply doesn't have the capacity to produce all the munitions that our nation needs and that our allies need, much less what we would need in a major conflict. So I think expanding munitions production, especially for necessary materials like nitrocellulose and RDX that are currently choke points in the munitions supply chain, will require us to leverage the inherent advantages of the facilities that you own, that the Army owns, those organic industrial base facilities like Pine Bluff Arsenal. All these places have highly trained workforces. They've already gone through onerous environmental permitting. They can handle munitions. They have the infrastructure that would only be replicated at a very high cost over many periods of years. Standing up munitions factories from scratch would cost millions and millions of dollars, while expanding operations at these existing facilities that we already own is much less costly and more efficient. And given that, can you commit to all of us, as the chairman suggested, that we work together to create a plan to expand and modernize the Army's organic base, including facilities like Pine Bluff Arsenal?
Senator, we absolutely want to work with this committee, and this is not intended to be a cop-out answer. As we look at our budget, one of the fundamental problems that we have is our military construction costs, and I'll do a parallel and then bring it right back, are 68.5% more expensive than if we just built something right on the other side of our fence line. And a lot of that is statutorily driven. There are some inefficiencies from government doing it, but generally speaking, there are so many constraints on us that when we try to work within our budget to expand our munitions supplies, and we look at the math oftentimes says we're too expensive for ourselves. So in the limited resource world that we live in, when we try to do these trade-offs, it's hard to justify. But working with this committee to try to streamline a lot of that, allocate additional resources, we are wholeheartedly in agreement that it is one of the most critical things for our country.
Thank you. I think we will want to examine the math, and we'll want to work together to find a path where we can meet the nation's munitions needs, some of which will come, no doubt, from expanded private production, but some of which is going to have to come from our organic industrial base. Thank you.
Mr. Secretary, we also might want to work with you on alleviating some of the constraints you referred to that you mentioned make it more expensive to work with the existing facilities. Thank you very much. Senator Hirono.
Thank you both for being here. I would like to join Senators Reid and Shaheen for once again raising our concerns about the deployment of 10,000 soldiers to the southern border and the use of 20,000 National Guardsmen to engage in immigration enforcement. We've raised these concerns, as I said before, about using soldiers to do things that are not in the mission of the DoD. These are raised at your nomination hearings, Mr. Secretary. Can you commit to not supporting a request to use National Guards people for core law enforcement functions such as arrests and detentions?
Senator, I can commit to not using our National Guard for any unlawful use. And just to reiterate, I have not heard of one single request that makes me believe any current plan is something that they are not legally able to do.
So that's the operative word, the conditioning word, that you would not do anything that would be unlawful. And if the president says this is what he wants, in his view, whatever he does is lawful. So this is a legitimate concern that we have because the president has his priorities, and those priorities are to round up a lot of people, in many instances, I would say, illegally, raising those kinds of questions. So it is a legitimate question for you, Mr. Secretary, that you commit to not allowing the use of National Guards for law enforcement purposes. So I put that question to you out there. Secretary, it is very appropriate that the Indo-Pacific AOR is a focus of our national security. And one of the negotiations, critical negotiations that are occurring right now has to do with the training areas that the Army uses in Hawaii, including Pohakaloa, which is some 22,000 acres, some of it leased, critical portions of it leased from the state. And these lease negotiations have got to be completed successfully. Otherwise, these training areas expires in 2029, right around the corner. And these lands are crucial to maintaining military readiness in the Indo-Pacific, but also hold cultural significance for the Native Hawaiian community, a very important community. Will you commit to working closely in good faith with state officials, the community, and the Hawaii congressional delegation on this critical negotiation matter?
Absolutely, Senator. And just on behalf of the Army, the Hawaiian community, we speak to soldiers who had just redeployed from that area, and they always say how well they're treated and how well they're cared for. And so we are grateful for them taking care of our soldiers.
These negotiations are so critical that you know that there is a special person who's been appointed to facilitate these negotiations. General George, I applaud the Army's focus on innovative sustainment solutions like 3D printing to quickly and cost-effectively address long lead times for parts and delays in production. And you noted in your testimony that there was a delay of 1 year for a part that was going to cost only $20 from the private sector, and your material command 3D people just printed this part for 16 cents, something like that. So this is the kind of innovative and creative solutions that I very much applaud. So I secured a provision in last year's NDAA which directs the establishment of an advanced manufacturing facility in Hawaii to support all of the services. So is this something that you are supporting, General?
We are certainly supporting advanced manufacturing, 3D printing, making sure that we have it at, not just the large production facilities, but having it from top to bottom. That would start with like Rock Island, what we do, and there's commercial industries that are using that. We just tested it at Project Convergence out in the Pacific. I think a big piece of that too is giving our ability, because we normally do that under battle damage assessment and repair, is the right to repair, and that was a big part of what we had in Army Transformation Initiative as well. I know Secretary.
Thank you. So since you raised the example of what can be done if we had this kind of capability, I hope that you will prioritize our ability to do that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Senator Ernst.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, gentlemen, for being here today, Secretary Driscoll and General George. I'm always inspired by your willingness to move our great Army forward. So thank you for that. And I just want to take a brief moment and address some of the concerns as well that have been expressed by my colleagues about the utilization of the National Guard. And having been a longtime National Guard member, I say the more that we can use our soldiers in jobs that are appropriate for our soldiers, I say go for it. My soldiers always looked for those opportunities to volunteer to serve in those types of capacities. So whether they're working in logistics opportunities, they're fueling vehicles, they're repairing vehicles, if they are a transportation soldier, they're a transporter, they want to be able to drive, whatever it happens to be, we can always further their skills by having those types of mobilizations. We also just saw mobilization of 1,800 Iowa Army National Guardsmen. They are going overseas. It is a different type of mission than what we would see here in the United States, but we want to wish them Godspeed. We had a number of send-offs over the course of this past week. And just talking about transformation, I want to continue on with that theme. We're going through a lot of reforms for modernization, and you also have had some really notable progress in recruiting and retention. So, General George, if I could start with you, we're only midway through the year, and you've already met the Army's recruiting mission, or their goals. So can you talk to us a little bit about how that has been possible, and what you see as the motivating factor right now for young men and women deciding to serve in our great United States Army?
I think I would love to give my Ranger buddy here an opportunity to jump in on that one too. I think it starts with leadership. It has been picking the right recruiters. Our recruiters are doing great. We're trying to give them also the right technology. One example is using something right off the shelf so that people aren't filling out, which you're very familiar with, hundreds of forms, that it's down to something that's very simple so that our recruiters can get out there and talk about the Army. In the end, I think they want to join, the people that are out there, and we need to make sure that we continue to do that. They want to join a team that has a great mission and a great purpose, and, I think it's a great start for their life, and I think that that's the biggest thing, and we need to continue to get after that.
Agreed. Thank you. Secretary.
Senator, I was going to say one of the ways we look at retention and recruiting is as a trailing and a leading indicator of the health of the Army. And so on the leading indicator side, do young people want to come join a an organization that is returning to its lethality roots. It's pushing for excellence. Do they want that? And very excitingly, 8 months into our 12-month goal, we hit the annual goal. On the retention side, those are the soldiers that are every single day seeing, is their leadership, are their senators, is the bureaucracy delivering to them what they need to stay in? And even more exciting to us is we hit that 12-month goal 6 months into the year. And so we think of these as very good indicators that the Army's in a healthy spot with our humans.
It's really, really astounding. And I appreciate the remarkable work that you both have done. Now, I did introduce the SERVE Act, and that will improve the connection between service opportunities and local communities. And I'm really, really excited about the opportunity to get that passed this year. Again, going back to the Army transformation, I really do support the initiative and its efforts to redirect resources toward emerging capabilities like the counter UAS, electronic warfare, air defense. We saw what happened in Russia with the Ukrainian drone attack. Really sobering reminder on how modern warfare is changing and how we need to adapt. So we're seeing the right kind of change within the Army. So again, kudos to you. We've got a bottom-up transformation. We've got experimentation and contact and smart divestments. So thank you for being willing to take some of those hard challenges on. You're making those hard choices. You're cutting positions, and you're reinvesting in our operational needs. And again, I know how tough that is. But Secretary Driscoll, how is the Army adapting its training and talent management to support these more technical kinds of units and our operational needs?
So to training, one of the most, and just to reinforce the bottom-up concept, I was down at Fort Jackson a couple weeks ago, which is where I did basic training 18 years ago. And you do these lanes 5 weeks into the course. So these are soldiers who've been in the United States Army for 5 weeks. And what their drill sergeants had done is they had gotten drones to film them in the lanes, and then in their after-action review, they would actually look and see, what do I look like from a drone's view? But then this is the part that's so remarkable to me. Each time they iterated, so each time a drill sergeant took soldiers through this event, they learned something from these soldiers who were 5 weeks in, and those learnings have trickled up from Fort Jackson, South Carolina, the Pentagon, and have actually changed some of the ways that we are telling people to engage with drones, which is just absolutely remarkable.
That's amazing. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Ernst. Senator Kane.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to our witnesses for your service. Happy birthday to the Army family. I look forward to celebrating at Fort Gregg Adams a week from tomorrow in the Petersburg area near where I live. I'm looking forward to that. Secretary Driscoll, you were here for your confirmation hearing on January 30, and I was not in a good mood that day, and it didn't have anything to do with you. The night before, I had been alerted about the crash at Reagan National, 67 lives lost earlier that morning. I had gone out to the scene to interact with the Secretary of Transportation and airport officials. We know a lot more today than we knew then. The NTSB did an interim report that they released in March, and they frankly pointed out a lot of flaws. There were flaws on the Army side in terms of some of the broadcasting equipment on the Black Hawk not being turned on during that flight, and problems with some of the routes, particularly in the congested airspace. There were serious problems on the air traffic control side. There was a real shortage of folks in the tower that day. Normally there would be one person handling the incoming jets and somebody else dealing with the helos. One person was doing both of those jobs when that crash occurred. Major problems with the FAA. In the decade before this crash, there had been hundreds of near misses between helos and passenger jets logged into the FAA, but the FAA had apparently done nothing with that information to try to solve or prevent an accident of the kind that occurred. And we got to be honest, Congress has not helped this situation either. Shortly before that crash, months before that crash, Congress voted to add more flights into an over-congested airport over the significant objections of the Metropolitan Washington Airports Authority, which is appointed by Congress to run these airports. And they had told us, this is a disaster waiting to happen. Please don't add more flights in. Congress chose to do so anyway, and it's my hope that we will have learned the lesson and not repeat that. The interim report in March of the NTSB is going to be followed up by a final report, or at least a more comprehensive report, we think, at the end of the month of July. But I just want to reflect back on you. The 67 families, the memory of the 67 and their families, they're looking for answers. And when they watch a hearing and they hear a question about it, as was directed by Senator Reid, and the answer is, there's an investigation ongoing and there's litigation, I'm going to tell you what they hear. What they hear when they hear that answer is minimizing liability is more important than our suffering. Minimizing liability is more important than making sure this doesn't happen again to other families. I've done a lot of disaster response as a mayor and governor, and I've had a lot of lawyers tell me, well, you can't really give answers because if you do, somebody might file a lawsuit against you. We owe it to the memory of the 67 and to their families for them to be completely confident that we are overturning every last stone and making every last fix to minimize the chance this will ever happen again. And right now, I will say I've interacted with the families a lot, and I'll echo what Senator Reid said. They frankly feel that American Airlines has been pretty solicitous towards them. They feel like the Commerce Committee in the Senate has been pretty solicitous towards them. They don't really feel like the Army has been solicitous towards them, have really sat down and heard their questions. And there's some that maybe can't be answered because the investigation is not yet complete, but they don't really feel that they're being listened to. And I think that's an important thing that I would just put to you, that, I think you have taken steps. I've met with the Army as recently as yesterday to talk about steps that have been taken with respect to new protocols about having the ASTB system generally turned on, and if it's not going to be turned on, there's kind of an important protocol you go through to make sure that you can have that turned off for sensitive missions without jeopardizing others. You've made some positive changes. You've made changes to the helicopter routes in the area, this national capital region. That's really important. But I don't necessarily think some of the public is aware of the changes that have been made. There was a recent incident in early May where a helo passenger jet interaction caused the air traffic tower to ask the jets to do a go-around because of a helo that was landing at the Pentagon. That's not necessarily a bad thing. That was out of an abundance of caution, but when things like that get reported in the paper, and I frankly think there was some of the reporting was a little bit inaccurate, when they get reported in the paper, it's not to our benefit. So what I would encourage you to do, share to the greatest degree possible with the families and with the public what the Army has already done, because I think you've taken some positive steps. And then just try to maintain as close a dialogue as you can, not only with the families of the 3 Army aviators who died, but with the families of the 64 who lost lives on the passenger jet that day. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Senator Kane. Senator Budd.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you both for being here today. Secretary Driscoll, it's great to see you again. Thanks for being in North Carolina in a very patriotic event with your family and supporting the Army in North Carolina. So I want to bring up something that you said yesterday during the testimony with the House Armed Services Committee. And then I've heard it referenced a little bit this morning in your opening comments and in your response to Senator Ernst's question. You mentioned about learning from overflights with drones and the training at Fort Jackson. I think that's excellent. So thank you for sharing that. We've all seen the stories coming out from Russia, how the Ukrainians have yet again showed boldness and initiative in Operation Spiderweb. And we applaud them, but it makes me think, how do we make sure that we don't become the victims in a similar situation against us? And how do we make sure that we're defending ourselves against potential enemy drone attacks? We've talked about offensive operations, but less about troop protection. So if you would talk about the Army keeping pace in drone and counter-drone technology, and how do we make sure that we protect our troops at home and abroad from these threats?
Thanks for the question, Senator Budd. And just to close out with Senator Kane, I will reflect on your remarks. If any of the families are listening, we are absolutely devastated by that outcome. If anything we are saying sounds like callous legalese, it's not intended to be. So thank you for sharing that, and I commit to reflecting and following up. Senator Budd, air and missile defense is, when we see our air defenders, and we saw them in the Middle East, we say with a very straight face that they are the new tip of the spear. The way that warfare is changing and what we saw with Operation Spider's Web in Russia and the sheer volume of damage, I think our estimate is for sub $20,000 in cost, they took out up to, call it 10-ish billion in assets, and we would face that same problem. It is one of the challenges of our lifetime as an Army to figure this out. We are testing all sorts of different solutions, from the smallest being just shooting a 50 caliber round, the highest being we have ground-based interceptors that are based in Alaska and are a lot more expensive. We have things in the middle like directed energy, which require kind of different power grids and different ways of thinking about delivering and storing power. We're doing all sorts of experiments with our soldiers. We were just with a company yesterday who is part of Operation Spider's Web in Ukraine and hearing about how they participated in it. And we said immediately, like, we've got to figure out how to get this technology into our soldiers' hands this summer so that we can start to learn, because it was obviously so effective there. And so I guess in summary, what we're trying to do is test as many things as we possibly can, and then work with this committee once we find the ones that are working to scale them as quickly as possible.
Thank you for that. General George, it was reported last year that the Army intended to raise a 5th multi-domain task force, and then it would be stationed in Fort Bragg, North Carolina, with the plan to be fully operational by fiscal year 2028. So the question is that still on track? And in a broader sense, how will the Army Transformation Initiative affect that force structure of the MDTF units?
Yeah, I would tell you, Senator, that those plans are still on track. These are capabilities that we know we're going to need. Now, I mean, all of the things for multi-domain effects that we're going to have to do to include the counter-UAS that you were just talking about. So that's definitely a capability that we're going to need and continue to grow.
So I want to, continuing, General George, I want to applaud the Army's investment in its next generation C2, or command and control program, which will take advantage of software solutions to give real-time data to commanders so they can make decisions better and faster than our adversaries. So what's the status of Next Gen C2, and where has it succeeded, and where can it improve?
I think if you were going to ask the Secretary or I, we're very encouraged by what we're doing. I think we know that we have to change how we pass data, move data, based on how you can be seen anywhere on this planet. We just saw out in when we were out in at the National Training Center, the concept, it works, and so we're now looking to scale it. We will have a division that's doing it this summer. We just want to go faster. I mean, and that's our press. We just did a warfighter over in Europe, and I know General Donahue. We just were up on the net with his team. This is transforming the network from theater all the way down to the tactical level, and we have to do as much as we can to go faster.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Budd. Senator King.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Very straightforward question. We've got this big parade coming up in a little over a week. What's the budget?
25 to 40 million.
That's a pretty rough estimate for something that's going to happen in less than 10 days. That's as close as you can give us here today?
We have a bucket set aside, Senator, for any contingencies or damage that we cause. We are aspiring to zero, but we have already budgeted in case we have to reimburse anyone.
So a minimum of 25 million and somewhere around 40 is the upward estimate?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. In October of 2023, a tragic event occurred in Maine where an Army reservist killed 18 people in a matter of minutes. Subsequent to that, it was determined that he had substantial brain injury, most likely caused, he was a trainer of in munitions, by blast overpressure and continued exposure. There was a lot of activity at the time in the Army and in the Pentagon generally on this issue of blast overpressure, mental health, baselining, and I just want to be sure, are you aware of that work? And I just want to be sure it isn't lost in the transition from one administration to the other. This is a very serious problem. It turns out that this one case in Maine was kind of a notorious one, but this is something that's throughout the armed services, particularly in the Army. General, do you want to address that? Are we staying after this issue?
We're staying after that. It was probably about 3 weeks ago that we had the team up to talk about that. So, and operators, and we're using one of our very specialized units that do a lot of these very high-end kind of training. It's, right now we have implemented the neurological testing, so people going on and doing that.
You're doing a baseline.
And that's the baseline, but also we are, changing, again, it's how you train as well. And you kind of alluded to that is, do you need the level of explosives when you're doing certain kind of training? How can you reduce that? We're looking at equipment. How do we change, for example, the Kevlar may be very helpful against, bullets coming at you, but it does other things when you have concussive events. And so how do we change that? So I probably once a quarter I will have discussions on this, and these are ongoing with what we're doing. So we're continuing on that.
And Senator, I can just echo, this does come up often, and we are trying to look at our training where obviously we're choosing to expose soldiers to things and make sure that it is worth the risk.
I appreciate that. And what all the right work has been done at the fairly high level. I just want to be sure it gets down to the ground in terms of day-to-day activity, that it's not just reports in the Pentagon, but that it's direct changes in the way equipment and training and those things, because as I say, it turns out to be a widespread problem and something we need to address. I appreciate your updates. Mr. Secretary, my understanding is the Army Transformation Initiative has recommended reducing civilian workforce in the Army by 23,000 people. My question is, where did that number come from?
I would jump in a little bit on this. So a lot of, Senator, what we had done, and again, this wasn't like, hey, we're going to reduce a specific number. I think you'll also notice in there that we're combining headquarters. We had examples where we had, two geo-led headquarters within a stone's throw of each other that kind of had overlapping missions. So what we are doing is looking at how we can, we're going to reduce our business systems. I think I mentioned that up front. We have a lot of old business systems and programs that we don't need, and that can be done with data. I have a smart board that's in my office where I can get most of this data. So that basically from top to bottom is what we're looking at. I do think that there are additional areas where we can, find more efficiencies. Our goal is to fill our formations.
So you've examined the structure and come to that number. You didn't start with a percentage or a number to work toward?
Correct, Senator. It was not driven not arbitrary, but it was not driven downward. It was where we thought there were redundancies, and then a lot of the cuts we reference in ATI are, to General George's point, the intent is when soldiers enlist, they don't want to sit in the Pentagon pushing paperwork. That headquarters function has grown and bloated, and it's our own fault. We are trying to push them back out to the formation.
It strikes me as a large cut. And I think it has to be weighted. It's about 1% of the Army budget for those 23,000 people. Some of them had to be doing useful work. I just would be interested in following up to see where the cuts are actually happening and the analysis that led to that. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Sullivan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, thank you for your testimony and your continued exceptional service to our great nation. Mr. Secretary, thank you for your Alaska visit. You made your commitment to me clear, and you followed through on it very quickly in your tenure. I appreciate that. I was just back home for the last 10 days and hosted the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Kane, and we had a good opportunity to meet with the 11th Airborne soldiers, who are really impressive. I want to get your impressions on your visit, and then I wanted to ask on the Army Transformation Initiative. General, thanks for coming into my office last week or 2 weeks ago to give an update. I want to get a sense of how the 11th Airborne Division will be impacted by that, particularly on two issues: the merging of the headquarters that may affect it, Fort Wainwright and J-Bear. We still want that to be a warfighting headquarters. I know you do too. It's been an admin headquarters for many years. I love the idea of the 11th Airborne now being the competitor to the 82nd Airborne. I know the 82nd Airborne has a storied history. So does the 11th Airborne, by the way, in World War II. A lot of people don't know that. But it's always good to have that good internal competition just for the 82nd Airborne folks watching. I do think the 11th Airborne is maybe not only catching you, but surpassing you, particularly on Arctic Ops. Maybe you guys can comment on that as well. But your impressions, Army Transformation Initiative, and then also the issue of the 11th Airborne's aviation assets necessary to complete that transformation from a Stryker brigade to a air assault unit up in Fairbanks. Want to make sure they're getting the proper helo assets, and what's your vision on that? So there's a lot of questions, but mainly your impressions to both of you on your Alaska trip. I think you guys are doing a great job up there. I think the morale's high. That's a unit that knows what it's all about now, which I think for a long time maybe it hadn't. And as you know, that purpose is important.
As somebody who was stationed at Fort Drum, New York, with the 10th Mountain Division, I think.
By the way, where there's no mountains.
I think I mentioned this in my hearing that you get there and there are no mountains there.
True?
And contrasting that with Alaska and the training at Black Rapids, I mean, it is remarkable what soldiers are out there doing. I ended up doing an exercise with some of them, and it's hard and it's different, and it's just the way you have to think about moving soldiers up these mountains is, and a lot of the world is filled with this Arctic mountainous regions. And so the other part that kind of we blew my mind was we went to a testing facility where they were testing our equipment in these incredible freezers that would go -50, -60 degrees, and they would show you what happens to fluid and what happens to all of these different items that we, the United States Army, purchase, that just the manufacturers either don't have the ability to do it or just don't take the time to do it. And there are all of these instances where we are buying $1 billion of something and finding out it can't operate in -20-degree temperature, which is cold, but it's not that cold. And so
yeah, and you get that a lot up at Fort Wainwright.
You get it a lot. And so the soldiers will take nearly every piece of equipment they get out on these very cold days on behalf of the United States Army so we can learn. And we have learned a lot, and it has changed how we procure things. We try to get it to them earlier in the process so they can tell us if it works in those conditions.
So on the helo assets and the headquarters, in terms of Army transformation, I know, General, you mentioned to me you didn't think that was going to impact the ops and size of the units up at the 11th Airborne, but can you unpack a little bit of that right now?
I would say one of the things that we're trying to do with the Army Transformation Initiative, and again, this gets to continuous transformation and make sure we're moving forward. I think that's actually a capability. You mentioned, having a division up there that needs to be a warfighting capability, that we need to add, certain lethal aspects to that division. And so, again, what we've got to do is I think other places, it's why we're trying to lead the way with what we're doing, reducing here and in other headquarters. This is exactly the kind of capability that we need to grow. And because of 11th Airborne, I think I've told you there, if you can operate when it's 40 and 50 below, those troopers have proved that they can go anywhere. They're just physically tough folks that can do things, and we want to invest in that Arctic capability up in Alaska.
By the way, that came up a lot in our discussions with General Kane. The ability, the discipline, the leadership needed to operate at 40 below zero. If you can operate in 40 below zero where it's hard to do anything, to your point, Mr. Secretary, you can operate anywhere in the world. You can operate in the jungle, you can operate in the desert, but you can't operate in 40 below zero unless you're trained, tough, and disciplined, and I think that's what those troops are becoming. So appreciate that. I'll have a few more questions for the record, but thanks for your leadership to both of you.
Thank you very much. Senator Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and gentlemen. Welcome to the committee, and thank you for your service. As we've discussed here in the committee, and three of us have had a chance to discuss in my office and other places, certainly the Army Transformation Initiative is going to refocus the Army towards future conflicts, and there's some real creative thinking, I believe, going into that, and I appreciate that. But as the Army begins this rapid modernization efforts, I'm hopeful we're going to continue to capitalize on my state, the state of Michigan's really unique commercial automotive expertise, including billions of dollars of research and development and advanced manufacturing talent that is located there. And at the same time, I think we also must ensure that ATI does not compromise readiness, innovation, and manufacturing. And I'm specifically concerned about potential impacts on some critical hubs like the Detroit Arsenal, as well as the Ground Vehicle Systems Center in Michigan. These sites, as I think both of you know, are central to the Army's modernization goals and the key for both shaping, for testing, and fielding the next generation capabilities. Okay. So my first question is for you, Secretary Driscoll. Do I have your commitment to work together to maintain both the Arsenal and GVSC's role in supporting the future for the Army's both wheeled as well as tracked vehicles?
I would love to work with you, Senator. And the ISV, the Infantry Squad Vehicle, it comes off of Chevy, Colorado, so it's dual use. The GM Defense have been incredible partners. I saw them a couple weeks ago as we were visiting, and what they have been able to make for our soldiers. And their CEO actually goes out into the field with our soldiers to figure out how can it be better, and then they will iterate those changes within a couple of weeks. So I completely agree that what has occurred in the vehicle manufacturing in Michigan is incredibly valuable for soldiers.
And my understanding, well, thank you for bringing that vehicle up. And General, you and I talked about that as well, but I'll ask you another question. But my understanding is when you leverage that commercial expertise, you mentioned the Silverado used for this particular vehicle, you can go from concept to prototype to low-rate production within 6 months. That doesn't happen very often in the procurement process. And that's my question for you, General George. Can you speak to how the Army is going to continue to leverage Michigan's automotive manufacturing and R&D efforts and kind of build on what Secretary Driscoll told us?
Certainly, Senator. I think this gets back to what we're looking at for our all across acquisitions. And we do have, Detroit Arsenal is important to us. But what's really important is our access to adopt and modify technology that's coming from the commercial sector. That's been, really important to us. And what GM and Ford and those companies spend on R&D and what they're doing with autonomous systems, in certain ways, what we're looking at is how do we restructure to make sure that we are taking advantage of that and not trying to build our own systems. We can't compete with what those two amazing companies can do up there. So what specifically do we need to do? And that's been our focus. And we've talked to a lot of the companies that are up there, and we'll continue. So that will continue to be important to us. I think we need to adapt a little bit how we're doing that to take full advantage of what the commercial sector in Detroit offers us.
Great. Well, thank you for both of you for that answer. General George, exercises like Northern Strike in northern Michigan strengthen our ability to work with our allies and deter potential conflicts. Northern Strike currently brings over 6,300 participants from across the U.S., as well as our international partners, to Michigan's National All-Domain Warfighting Center. It's the largest training area east of the Mississippi. And both Admiral Paparo and the African Command Commander General Langley have praised Northern Strike for its strategic value as well as its importance to joint force readiness. So my question for you, sir, is do you support training exercises for increased interoperability with our partners, including multinational joint training exercises like Northern Strike? And will you also commit to working with me to expand both active and reserve components that will operate and train at Northern Strike?
Absolutely, Senator. I think and I've been up to Northern Strike, and I think it's very unique. I've been really proud of what the TAG and the Guard has done up there to make that a great training opportunity. And I think we're looking everywhere One of the things we need to do is expand our capability to do operate drones, operate in the electromagnetic environment, countering drones. So all of that, using those kind of spaces to do that will be critically important to us today and in the future.
And Senator, I think my office is coordinating with yours, but I'm actually going up there this year, I think, with you and your colleagues. So I look forward to seeing Northern Strike with you.
Well, I appreciate that. I look forward to that, and you'll be impressed like the General has been, I'm sure. So we'll welcome you there. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Tuberville.
Oh, thank you. Good morning. Good morning, gentlemen. Congratulations on your recruiting. I know how hard that is in my former profession, getting the right people. General, are we keeping our qualifications, discipline, values, physical requirements when we recruit these people?
I definitely think we are, Senator. And, one of the things that we have been having discussions is how we're raising our standards because of what what we're having coming in and doing that. So we've had fewer at the Future Soldier Prep course. We're going to keep that as an option. We do have times where we have some really brilliant soldiers out there that maybe need to spend a couple of weeks getting in a little bit better shape to join our formation, and that's what that's for, but really pleased with the path that we're on.
As long as we're putting them through that and they can handle it.
Yep.
Again, I've been through that before. A lot of people need to get in better shape. In Secretary Hess's memo directing the Army Transformation Initiative, it states that the Army will begin enabling AI-driven command control by 2027. Secretary Driscoll, how will the Army be using artificial intelligence to help decision-making?
Senator, we think of the Army as kind of two discrete functions when General George and I talk about it. One is like a large enterprise business that moves people and things across the country and the world. The other is hopefully an incredibly lethal killing machine and warfighting machine. And so I think AI and generative AI will meaningfully impact both spaces. The first thing we're working on is creating a data layer that basically allows for our people and our things and our sensors to all communicate in near real time. On the warfighting function, once you can have that occur, you can layer in generative AI for things like fires targeting. For air and missile defense, it's incredibly valuable. I would estimate that we'll start to see that at scale in kind of 12 to 18 months. On the Army as an enterprise business side, we're incredibly optimistic. We have 200 plus enterprise systems right now that are oftentimes siloed. Oftentimes we've had software created just for us that we have to maintain that is decades out of date. And we think generative AI will be able to help us with all sorts of tasks in the coming months. I'm excited to announce or just give credit to the recruiting team. They've onboarded to a very common CRM, customer relationship management tool called Salesforce. Generative AI can be applied to a lot of the things that we do as we recruit soldiers and bring them into the Army.
Thank you. Right outside the gate at Redstone Arsenal. Secretary, have you been there yet?
Would you mind repeating that?
Have you been to Redstone Arsenal in Huntsville yet?
What state is that in?
That's in Alabama.
I have.
Okay. If you hadn't, we need to get you there. And by the way, you're making decisions and transforming our military. I'm good with that. You're actually cutting some contracts and things in my state. If it helps, I'm all for it. And so we'll work with you as much as we can. But right outside the gate at Redstone, a partnership between Davidson Technologies and D-Wave had completed the assembly of a quantum computer system that should be soon complete its calibrations and readiness tests. Secretary, how can the Army leverage these new systems in successfully implementing its transformation and optimize the future the right way?
Senator Slotkin and I were at a dinner a couple nights ago talking about quantum computing and what quantum computing is going to be able to do to how our ability to process information as human beings is otherworldly. It's some things as simple as convoy routes for transportation, all the way up to you could probably start to plan out where should you put air and missile defense systems and how would they react in near real time to threats. And so any sort of innovation like that, we are completely supportive of.
Thank you. It's a lot of good things going on, especially with AI. I hope we all understand, too, that for AI and all the future big tech stuff, we're going to need energy big time. China doubles our energy every 3 years that we have in this country. We're way behind, and we can talk about all these technologies that we want. unless we have energy, which is going to be, should be a national security threat, then we're going to have huge problems. You agree with that, Secretary?
Yes.
General?
Yes, Senator, I do.
Yeah, I would hope we start talking about it a lot more, make sure that, with all these things we got coming down the pipe, that we have the availability to, number one, be able to build them, and number two, have the energy to run all of our data centers and mega data centers in the future. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Tuberville. Senator Blumenthal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you both for your service, and thanks for being here today. I listened to your early response, Secretary Driscoll, about the cost of the celebration that's planned. Just to be absolutely clear, I'm all in favor of celebrating the Army's 250th. I'm hoping maybe we'll celebrate the Navy's as well. Having some Marine Corps background. But I am struck by the cost, $25 to $40 million. As Senator King said, that's a pretty wide spread, and you're saying that it's due to the damage that may be caused? Is that the result of having tanks going through the streets of Washington and possibly tearing up the streets? And what other damage would be done?
To the cost, Senator, I think from our perspective, we're optimistic and we'll be able to report to you after the parade. If
But why have tanks? Why this kind of parade?
We believe we have a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to fill up our recruiting pipeline with young Americans.
Wouldn't your preference be to save money in light of the budget cuts we're seeing for training programs, freezes on hiring, shrinking staff levels, deferring maintenance, jeopardizing equipment maintenance? These problems are not theoretical. Wouldn't you agree that this money could be better spent? We don't have unlimited funds.
Very sincerely, Senator, I think this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to tell the story of the American Army.
There are a lot of once-in-a-lifetime opportunities. We all have them. But it doesn't mean that we spend money extravagantly. In fact, it would be an honor to the Army to, in fact, devote those resources to where they're really needed. And let me just cite to you the fact that the National Guard Bureau has yet to be reimbursed $38 million by the Department of Army for its essential work during the presidential inaugural mission. It isn't a minor oversight. This mission demanded the Guard's expertise in security and logistics and emergency response, and the National Guard needs that money. Why are you stiffing the National Guard and spending $25 to $40 million on a parade?
I'm not aware of the $38 million that you're talking about, Senator. We just went down yesterday. That was one of the things that we're talking about. That we were talking about some of the things that we need to put out there that we've been working through. So I can follow up with you on that.
Well, I hope that you will, because I have a lot of trouble justifying to veterans who've been fired from positions in the federal government that we're spending potentially $40 million on a parade when they have been fired because supposedly we have to eliminate waste, including veterans who were in the Department of Veterans Affairs. I don't know how you can justify that kind of expenditure. Let me ask you, drone warfare. Are you satisfied that we are doing enough to protect our bases in this country and elsewhere against the swarms of small, lightweight drones, such as Ukraine used in its Operation Spiderweb, and such as terrorists used in the Middle East against our base in Jordan? I've visited that area. I've heard personal descriptions from the troops there about what they fear in our inability to defend them against these types of small, lightweight drones. Are you satisfied we're doing enough both on the offense to develop our drone warfare and in terms of defending our cities as well as our bases?
Senator, we are not doing enough. The current status quo is not sufficient. We are rapidly trying to iterate and prototype and work with companies who actually are deploying their technologies into Ukraine. I think this is probably an instance where the United States can be a fast follower. If we can ingest and suck out a lot of the lessons learned in the technology from Ukraine.
I'm going to interrupt because my time is about to expire, and I know the chairman will interrupt me, but I have visited the Ukraine drone factories. I've spent some time with their military talking about their drones, and I guarantee you they are at the tip of the spear. They are way ahead of us. We have a lot to learn from them, and it's not just a luxury or convenience. We are at risk because of the technology that they have developed, and the Russians are soon going to take from them, because that's the pattern in this war. The Ukrainians take a step, the Russians try to keep up with them on drone warfare. And I think we not only have a lot to learn, but we have an obligation to learn it. And I would like to ask you, just because my time has expired, for a briefing on this area, which I think is revolutionizing modern warfare. Thank you,
Senator, I think that's a very important goal. I would note for members that we will have a closed hearing immediately, 15 minutes after the adjournment of this. Yeah. And I would suggest that the senator would want to ask those questions.
I would love to a chance to address you on that topic in specific.
So let's do that.
Even if, with respect, Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure I'll be able to attend the closed briefing. I'm going to try, but the briefing may not exhaust this topic. I would suggest a specific briefing on drone technology and warfare.
All right. Well, there'll be no time limit and no limit on the subject matter. So we'll do the best we can, and I hope the senator will be able to attend. Senator Schmidt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I actually share Senator Blumenthal's. I think that'd be a good thing to do. And it seems to be the topic du jour, which is UAS and counter UAS, and probably for good reason. Although, you know, we've been briefed on these topics before. Seeing what everybody saw with with Ukraine and with Russia, I think sort of highlights the need for us to be speedy with this. We can talk more about it in a classified setting, but certainly it's been something that is on the radar. I want to commend the Army for, I think, being ahead of this, and quite frankly, versus the Air Force. I think the Air Force is, from everything I've gathered, is really clumsy about how they're protecting our assets with counter UAS, and it's just it's an unwillingness to adopt technologies that already exist in the private sector, and I don't really understand why. And that's not really the question for you guys today, but I know that you guys are sort of leading the joint effort, right? The joint. Can you talk me through what might be done then? Let's just say of all the branches, you guys are number one in this, and noting and granting that there's work to do. How can you help influence what, like, just say the Air Force is doing? I mean, this is a big concern. Obviously, Whiteman Air Force Base is in Missouri. Fort Leonard Wood's also in Missouri, but could you just walk me through that, what that leading that effort means, and how we can lead to be more nimble as it relates to counter UAS?
I think, Senator, this is a joint problem. Everybody's going to have to understand how to not only employ drones, but protect yourself from drones and autonomous systems. So, you know, I will again point out that I think we need to be more agile in our funding and buy capabilities. You kind of referred to that we don't get locked into some program because things are moving very rapidly. The discussion we had yesterday with somebody who was supporting Ukraine, I mean, was an update, and it's going to continue to happen. I think stateside we have submitted, I think we're going to have to make some changes. One, we're going to have to work locally with the FAA and FCCs locally. But some of this gets to the 130I and I think that that's legislated as far as what it is, how we can share information on drones. I think that legislation is about 9 or 10 years old, and I think that needs to get updated. And then the big thing that we're looking at is on every system we've mentioned. I think we should be, one, really focused on cost curve. How do we do this in a way that, you're not sending $1 million missiles or using big expensive equipment against things that are relatively cheap, and that's what we're looking at. And we are running a very large exercise this month and next. Right now we're doing this overseas and going through all of that, and I would love to come and brief you on off that, because there's several different systems, both kinetic and non-kinetic,
right,
that we are employing, really around the world, because they work different in different environments, and we're doing the same thing stateside. We've done stuff where we've sent things, for example, down to the border to make sure that we're testing it in every environment.
And it's having a great impact, I think, on what's happening at the border now. In many ways, the autonomous efforts are not only are they gathering important intelligence and directing critical resources to apprehend people trying to come here illegally, there's sort of a scarecrow effect too. Like it's there, people know it's there. The cartels are sophisticated in the places that they want to go. So, I think at the border, this is actually very important. But I want to drill down just a little bit with the time that I have, and this is going to be a much longer discussion. But as it relates to, there's a big focus on the actual drone and what the drone does. But there's a lot of things that happen before a drone were to be intercepted or shot down. There's detection, right? There's sort of awareness with sensors. And how is the Army what steps are being taken right now to make us more nimble to acquire these sorts of systems? Because I do have great concern that the efforts that are being made, we've got a long way to go. So what is happening right now? And maybe that's for you, Mr. Secretary or General.
Senator, what we are trying to do is, and we can talk about this more in the classified setting, but talk specifically to the companies and the tool makers that are being used in war right now and figure out how do we get what they used on Sunday was a pretty ingenious way to get it in some ways. And I think we would not have been ready for that, and we are not ready for it. But we know what they did. We are going to get in the hands of soldiers in the coming weeks, and we will be after that.
And I appreciate that candor, and just make them one final point. I think that, and this is the Air Force in particular, I'm sorry that I'm picking on the Air Force today, but the truth is they've asked private companies to come in and do an assessment, and they have a good way to do it, and they say, oh, thank you for your input. We're going to keep doing it the way we're doing it. That's my concern. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your grace for my extra 40 seconds.
And thank you, and that's our responsibility to change that, Senator. Let me just say this with regard to drones, because this can be said in an open session, and we'll have a closed session. The public will not know it. But our reconciliation bill contains $1 billion of funding for small drones and another $1 billion for one-way attack drones. Some of that will not go to the Army, but much of it will. And I wanted the public and members who will not attend the closed session to know that. Senator Duckworth.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to associate myself with Senator Blumenthal's comments about blowing $30 million on a parade. Let's be clear, you're not doing it to celebrate the Army's birthday. You're doing it to stroke Donald Trump's ego. If you want to celebrate the Army's birthday by spending $30 million, I would recommend you think about something along the lines of maybe spending that money on child care for military families, perhaps tuition reimbursement for military families. There are lots of ways to celebrate the Army's birthday without blowing it all on a parade. I also want to echo the concerns of my colleagues, Senator Reid, Shaheen, and Hirono, about misusing and burning the readiness of our National Guard troops and other expensive military assets, like deportation flights for so-called interior law enforcement operations. The military should not do the job of DHS for it. I'm especially concerned by your answer to Senator Hirono, Mr. Secretary. I think you copped out with your answer of, we will do what's legal. That answer ignores your obligation to advise what is right for our war fighters and to focus on war fighting, not to say what is legal. Secretary Driscoll, General George, I appreciate much of your transformation efforts. I've long advocated for the Army to make hard, forward-looking decisions, and I especially support the push to modernize our munitions enterprise to produce and deliver munitions to warfighters at scale. That's why your proposed cuts to Rock Island are confusing and troubling to me. Rock Island Arsenal is a critical part of the Army's advanced manufacturing ecosystem. It is central to the future of battlefield sustainment and logistics. Yet under your current plan, two commands with very distinct missions, Army Sustainment Command and Joint Munitions Command, would be integrated. We've been told this consolidation will result in workforce reductions of approximately 100 personnel and the phasing out of a data center in Army Material Command. Beyond this, details are scarce. Secretary Driscoll, do you have more recent updates on the workforce impacts of these planned changes, including how many personnel will be affected and the timeline of implementation?
Senator, I just want to echo how important Rock Island is. I think we have a trip scheduled or hopefully soon to go up there. The workers up there have been remarkable and have helped our country and our Army for a long time. As it relates specifically to sustainment and the Joint Munitions Commands, when we were looking at it, basically the headquarters exist so close together, we thought we could have efficiencies without actually impacting the outputs by combining. The intent is not to slow down production in any sort of way. And then specifically, Senator, to your question, no changes from what you referenced.
I know. How many personnel will be affected and what's the timeline of implementation?
I wanted to just kind of reinforce, we have, two headquarters that are kind of very almost co-located, and there's a lot of things that we can do within that, I think, to combine that. So what we still need and what we want to invest in is all the technical expertise that, we get at Rock Island and, probably the unmatched right now 3D printing capability, additive manufacturing that even commercial industry is coming in there and using it. So it's kind of we're looking across the formation of how we can update our business systems, combine some of these capabilities, and I think it's going to make us better. And we're happy to come over and brief you that in detail or meet you at Rock Island, Senator, and have that discussion.
Okay, I'll be willing to meet you at Rock Island. Secretary Driscoll, still the same question. How many personnel will be affected and what's the timeline of implementation? You still haven't answered me.
Senator, we're currently working on the plan. It is I would actually hypothesize there would be growth at Rock Island on a net basis. But combining those units, they're working on the plans right now. We'll provide them the moment they're available.
Okay. I mean, I think what you're doing is scaling down. I hope that the answer is that we're going to work towards a minimum workload, at the very least, at Rock Island to maintain that capacity. I want to flag that I joined the Bipartisan Arsenal Workload Sustainment Act with Senators Durbin, Grassley, Ernst, and Representative Sorensen. This bill would incentivize private industry to partner with arsenals to ensure a more predictable workload throughout the year to enhance efficiency and keep costs low at all of our arsenals. I hope that you and General George will work with us to move and get this legislation passed.
We'd love to, Senator.
Thank you. I'm also deeply concerned by the Army's plan to divest from the Humvee and JLTV without a clear replacement that meets the full spectrum of mission requirements. We have been told that the infantry squad vehicle was identified as the future for ground mobility, but let's be honest, the current model of that vehicle does not support the needs of medical evacuation. And the Humvee fleet that you plan to retain, which could serve as ambulances in the meantime, is already facing severe maintenance issues. This ground capability for medical evacuation is not a gap that we can afford to ignore. What is the Army's plan to bridge this gap in ground medical evacuation capacity as the Humvee is phased out? Either one of you can take that.
Yeah, I'll take that one, Senator. You brought up the armor protection. We have 18,000 plus JLTVs, continuing to buy those. So obviously medical evacuation and how we do that. Having done that, with all of our vehicles, it's why we're also talking about having armored vehicles that are inside our formations are going to be critical moving forward. So we need a broad bunch of capability. We're also looking at autonomous systems and how they can go into certain areas. We have 105,000 Humvees, and certainly that's part of we're going through that process right now, how we make sure that we're maximizing the vehicles we need. You mentioned medical vehicles. That would be in that category of how we would make sure that we're maintaining that capability that we need. So they're going to be in our formation. We've bought what we need to have inside our formation.
And thank you, Senator. Senator Scott.
Sure. Thank you, Chairman.
Secretary Driscoll, General George, thank you both for being here. I want to thank you, President Trump, Secretary Hidstaff, for ensuring that our Army is a lethal warfighting machine. I appreciate all the changes you're working to make to restore the warfighting ethos and that our Army is ready for whatever may come. Can you talk about, when I was governor of Florida for 8 years, and we put a lot of effort into a program in Orlando, a simulation training instrumentation program headquartered in Orlando. It plays a critical role in preparing unmatched testing, modeling, simulation, and training systems to ensure our warfighters are ready for the next fight. There's a reason it's in Central Florida. It hosts a world-class manufacturing, science, and technologies industry that supports over 30,000 good-paying jobs, generates more than $7 billion annual in economic impact in the region. It's also strategically located in a unique defense innovation ecosystem alongside your other partners, Navy, Air Force, Marines, and recently established U.S. Space Force training headquarters at Patrick Space Force Base. So we put a lot of effort into it when I was governor, and we put a lot of effort to make sure this place everybody wants to serve. Can you talk about what your plans are there? Either one of you. Yeah,
I'll jump in on that, Senator. Obviously very important to us. Simulation is very important to us. Just took a brief back 2 days ago. We consistently run the warfighters. What I will tell you is that we're looking at, I think we can do more with commercial industry, and that's kind of what we're focused on, down there with PEO STRI. And, there's companies all over our country that can produce simulations. Right now, our overhead for our simulation exercises that we're running, which are with soldiers, is high, and I know that the technology exists for us to move that. So that's generally what we're trying to do down there. We just did a big conference down in Orlando. It was about 6 weeks ago, where we kind of explained where we need to move with next-gen simulation. And much like some of the previous comments, I think us doing this internally is, we are going to need less expertise. We should be able to adopt and modify commercially available tech that is out there, and that's what we're focused on.
And Senator, I would just say simulation has leapt forward in the last couple of years too, and it should have some incredible benefits to the United States Army. If we think about TRADOC and the number of times that we have to uproot soldiers from their families and move them somewhere in the world, that's not a particularly good outcome for all training. And so we're looking at simulation and trying to expand our use cases outside of its typical kind of maybe siloed wargaming function to actually start to empower and train our soldiers around the world.
So what impact do you think it'll have there, and what impact will it have on your ability to work with all the other branches?
I don't think it'll impact. What we're looking at when is basically aligning our program management where we have adopt, modify, and develop. And I think these are areas where we need to be developing it less on our own and adopting it more from people out there that really know how they do that. So there'll be people that can oversee those programs, people that understand contracting, and actually having warfighters down there to know what we need, and then getting it out to our formations quickly.
Okay. If there's anything I can do to help you all, just let me know. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator.
Senator Rosen.
Well, thank you, Chairman Wicker, Ranking Member Reed. I appreciate it. And I would also like to thank Secretary Driscoll, General George, for testifying today for your service to our country. I know we're talking a lot about training, so I'm going to talk about small arms training, small arms range in Nevada, of course, because Army leaders in the past have made commitments to me to build Nevada's first certified small arms training range, at Hawthorne Army Depot, so that the Nevada National Guard and Reserve soldiers no longer have to travel out of state to fulfill their annual weapons qualification at an average cost of $500,000 per year per unit. You want to save money? Build our range. I'm appreciative that the Army followed through on these commitments and included this project in the FY 2025 budget request, which was added in both the House and Senate FY 25 appropriations bills. However, since Congress did not pass these bills and instead passed a full-year CR without budget tables, we lack certainty about whether or not the Army will actually fund this project, which is already well underway. So to both of you, can I have your commitment that the Army will in fact deliver Nevada's first certified small arms training range so that our soldiers can meet their annual requirements at a greater convenience and lower cost to the taxpayer. Secretary Driscoll?
Yes, Senator.
General George,
Yeah,
thank you.
we love
Secretary
rifle
Driscoll.
ranges, for the
Thank
record.
Yes, Senator.
Secretary, thank you. We're going to stay on this, and we're going to talk about the Transformation Initiative and its impact to Nevada. You know, again, Hawthorne Army Depot is the world's largest ammunition depot and demilitarization facility. The depot stores and demilitarizes munitions and ensures munitions readiness for each of the services. Despite its size and crucial role that Hawthorne plays, it's in dire need of continued infrastructure upgrades. Investing in our munitions depot has only become more important in light of our need to ramp up munitions production, backfill our stockpile. So we've heard quite a bit today about the Army Transformation Initiative, but I'm concerned about these broad structural changes, particularly reductions in platforms, personnel, systems, as you've been alluding to. They might impact critical facilities and communities such as Hawthorne. So during both your confirmation hearings, you made commitments to consider further investments in Hawthorne. And can I have your commitment as that the Army moves forward with its transformation initiative? Investments in Hawthorne will continue providing munitions readiness for the Army and DoD. Secretary Driscoll?
The munitions depots are incredibly important. Our magazine depth is not where it needs to be. We have got to figure out as a nation how we are going to do these investments. I think when you're referencing the cuts that we're making at ATI, what we're trying to do is, from a bottoms-up approach, where we over-indexed on things like Humvees or JLTVs, or where did we over-invest in research and development for things like our robotic combat vehicles, where can we save money and reallocate those dollars to best help with all of these big problems that we have. And so I can absolutely commit that we would want to work with your office to figure out how can we rapidly continue to scale our munitions base.
Perfect. General George, please.
Yeah, I would agree with what the Secretary said. And plus, you know, the other thing that we'd like to work with you on is how we can probably build some of these things and repair things cheaper, because I'm confident we can do that as well.
We would love to work with you on that. Thank you so much. And my final question is about cyber workforce development, because the FY24 NDAA included my bipartisan legislation authorizing the Army to create a civilian cybersecurity reserve to provide cybercom with qualified civilian personnel for surge capacity, ensuring that the U.S. government has the cyber talent it needs to respond to malicious activity and secure the DoD's information and its systems. So, General George and then Secretary Crystal, can you provide a status update on the Army's implementation of a civilian cyber reserve?
I just had I think it was last week, I took a readiness brief specifically on cyber and had our Army cyber came up and how we're filling the formations. What I don't have for you is the specifics on the civilians. I will tell you this is a conversation we have a lot as far as like for the Guard and people that are actually out there working in, and that's their day job, and have them, you know, connected to that is critically important to us. There's a lot of folks filling those positions. I do think this is an area we are trying to expand this. We're doing pretty good right now expanding it, but as you know, this is something that takes months and years to get the exquisite capability that we're talking about. So I can come and go over this in detail with you.
Great to have a meeting with my team. I appreciate that. Thank you. Secretary Driscoll.
Nothing additional to add other than we talk about this all the time, a little more often in the National Guard and Reserve sense, but the civilian ability to scale our cyber needs, everything we're talking about with this data layer and generative AI will require cyber warriors to help us.
Especially as we try to implement Cybercom 2.0. So thank you. Thank you both.
Thank you very much, Senator Banks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks to both of you for being here today. I want to echo what others have already pointed out. It's somewhat awkward to have a budget hearing without the Army's budget. So when it is released by the Pentagon later this month, I hope we can work together to talk about priorities in the budget and how we can fight for them. But General George, thanks to the inspirational leadership of President Trump and Secretary Hegseth, there's a big difference between this year and last year when it comes to Army recruitment. And I want to unpack that with you a little bit. The Army has already met its recruiting goals for the rest of this fiscal year. the Army is seeing its best recruitment numbers in over 10 years, and the Army has already beaten its retention goal for the year. What do you make of that? What's the big difference between last year and this year that has gotten us to that point?
I would tell you, Senator, we have made steady improvement over time with that. As you know, we've been talking about how we pick our recruiters, the leaders that we have, giving them the right technology, the technology to make sure they're doing that, reducing the amount of forms and things that people are figuring out. So we hope to continue on that exact. We have had very good months. I think we are at this point in time, where we got this, we hadn't seen this since 2014. So we're very happy with where we're at.
You say we've had very good months, and I want to go there. Was there a good month? Was there a point, if you study the trends of these recruitment numbers, when did you see this significant shift? Because this is a significant difference between last year and this year.
Yeah, I can get you the monthly data that goes, back from September, October, and we have seen a slight rise, but we've been on a pretty good, steady path.
I just want to. Was November an indicator? November 5th.
We did have a really.
Was there a significant increase in Army recruitment after November 5th?
We have seen recruitment numbers come up a little bit.
Yeah, because it seems obvious to me that who the commander-in-chief is matters to military recruitment, and I have seen those trends, General, and it would be great to unpack them even further with you, the difference between last year and this year, and a Pentagon that's focused on lethality, a commander-in-chief who's inspiring the next generation to step up and serve our country. And my big question for you, though, is how do we keep that going? What do we do from this point forward to keep those recruitment numbers heading in the direction that they are?
This is a discussion we have, pretty consistently. I mean, I think we have to continue to do what we're doing. We have to constantly evaluate. For us, are we getting the right? We track, 16 different specialties and making sure that we're doing it. One of them that we have been doing very well on this year that we have had struggles with was 18 X-ray. How do we reach those people? How are we assessing folks in there? How we look at our marketing, I think this is just something that we have to constantly evaluate, Senator. And it's important too on the retention side. You mentioned that what we're doing inside of our formation to make sure that we're retaining our soldiers.
Can you give us some anecdotes or reasons why higher recruitment and higher retention matters to the United States Army?
I mean, I think it matters to everybody in the joint force. So you want to have fully capable, trained formations.
What can you do with better retention and recruitment that you couldn't do without?
What's important about retention is that you're keeping, we were just talking about cyber, you're keeping somebody in that you've trained. Some people, I enlisted in the Army, many, many years ago. You look at keeping people that you have invested in, you've trained in. Oftentimes people have other opportunities. They stay because of the team and because of the mission. Signal, I can go down, but NCOs really drive our training inside of our formation at the platoon, company, and battalion level, and keeping those great NCOs on our team is obviously critically important to our lethality.
And Senator, it's a virtuous cycle. When we are having a harder time recruiting, we have to lower standards, which definitionally means we're letting in just a different population, and the Army feels that. And what we're able to do now is there's so much demand. We can start to raise standards. We can start to focus on putting people where we have the most need.
And clearly, the last administration lowered standards to meet recruitment goals. And can we go backwards and put those standards back to where they need to be so that we're getting the best and the brightest? Since the Trump bump of recruitment is obviously real. So I guess that's what I'm going for.
We are actively, quantitatively raising standards on things like our APFT. And if this momentum continues, we will continue to prioritize giving slots to basic training to the most qualified young adult.
That's really great news. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Senator Banks. Senator Slotkin.
So I don't want Senator Kelly to beat me up. We thought he was going next, but I will happily take my 5 minutes. Thank you for being here. We've talked a lot, even this week, about the Army transformation, and I'll echo a number of things that Senator Peters said. I think we all understand the need for the Army to modernize. I don't think there's a single person who feels like we should stay the same and the status quo is just doing great. And that's based on the fact that China is investing in new technology, new techniques, and if they and others that we may hopefully never have to fight, if they are ahead of us on a whole bunch of different things, like we're not doing our job in preparing and protecting the United States. So I think we're all on the same page. I just want to make sure that it's not just about cutting stuff, right? And we understand that you've looked at cutting things like Humvees and the JLTV and things that Michigan does, but that we also look at processes and procedures, right? You alluded to this in your strategy. Right now, China can go from concept to fielding a new system in 1 year. The U.S. military, and I say this with love, can go from concept to fielding in 3 years if we're lucky, right? If we're lucky. So to me, the future is going to be won by the people who are most agile and flexible in taking the new great idea, some of the stuff we're seeing in Ukraine right now, and moving it to contact faster. And I would just offer that we don't want to destroy the defense industrial base. We want to update it. And I think Michigan can be the place to do that advanced manufacturing, to bring in AI, to bring in 3D printing, to bring in all these new techniques that are going to make us go faster. So I'm thrilled that you're coming. We're going to show ourselves off. And instead of fighting to hold on to everything that we've had in the past, we want to be the defense point of contact for advanced manufacturing for the future. And we're going to give you the dog and pony to make sure you feel the same way, because we are pretty hot shit in what we do in Michigan. I'm just going to say that. Sorry to swear, Mr. Chairman. Can you talk a little bit about why, like on the advanced manufacturing piece, can you help elaborate on what the Army is going to do to speed up that flash to bang concept to fielding with advanced manufacturing?
So, Senator, just to the earlier point about the cuts, I think when we've rolled out Army Transformation Initiative, there were basically 4 buckets. I won't hit them all, but the first bucket was the cuts in order to take the $48 billion in savings that the President of the United States and Secretary of Defense empowered us with to innovate and spend it to make the Army stronger. And General George and I are optimistic that Army Transformation Initiative will be a renaissance for the American industrial base, for small and medium businesses, so that they can show us their innovation. We, the United States Army, have been a very poor customer oftentimes, and I would say perhaps all the time. We do not allow small and medium businesses to show us their product, have us get into the hands of soldiers, show them how to improve it, and then reward them when we need it often enough. And there's this chasm that has been created that only incredibly large companies that take, I would say 3 years is generous, and it's probably closer to 10. Yeah. But we are actively working to fix it.
Yeah, and I would just say to your earlier point about modeling and simulation, Michigan is quickly becoming the hub for, if you want to test something out before you have to build an actual scale model, bring in a platoon of guys to let them put on the VR glasses and test something out before we build it. We're going to become the hub of that, and we are eager to show that off. But I would say, I think one of my many criticisms of this administration in general is that they're really happy to have the press conference about cutting this many people or this many programs. But as someone who worked in the federal government, it's often the procedures within the departments and agency that take forever, right? There's so many steps, there's so many things to do. And I would welcome the Pentagon actually saying, we're not just gonna do the press conferences on how many woke people we got rid of or woke programs we got rid of. And I would contend with some of those things. But it is about actually cleaning up our internal processes so it's not so laborious. And I've never once, a Democrat or Republican, including the Trump administration first time, gotten a proposal, please take off these regulations. Please, Congress, remove these things. They may have been well-intended, but it's too much. So please don't just do the shiny object, the stuff that gets the political attention. Please actually dig in and do the damn work so that if you want transformation, you actually get it.
And I just want to quickly give my Ranger buddy a shout out on the recruiting side. There were over 600 forms that could possibly be filled out on recruiting. 600. I don't even know what they could all possibly ask. But obviously, you'd have to repeat your name 57 times on each of the forms. And what General George did with the recruiting team is he said, you are not allowed to have more than 10 forms, full stop, make it work. And they are at currently, I think, 8 or 9. And have cut down on 592 forms, which is remarkable. And we would be delighted to give you that list.
Yeah, thank you very much. I yield back.
Can I add one thing, Chairman?
Oh, sure.
Thank you. We have asked Senator for agile funding in the past, and we have to buy capability portfolios for drones, counter drones, EW. We will be submitting that as part of our budget to have that capability. We've been asking, I think, in here for that.
I would happily give flexible funding and multi-year funding if we could get our act together up here. I think we can all acknowledge that we haven't, but it's also for more traditional things. We've given you a lot of authorities over the years. There's a culture problem in the Pentagon. It's not just what more authorities we can give you. So I'm open to it 100%, but do the internal work too.
Yep.
Thank you, Senator Slotkin. Senator Kelly, you were polite, I think, and let Senator Slotkin walk in the door ahead of you, and you seem to have been punished for that.
Well, it worked out well because of what she had asked, Mr. Chairman.
So you yield
back.
Good
lead-in.
I understand you're yielding back. Is that correct?
No, I am not. Okay. I am not.
Senator Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, Senator Slotkin. It was perfect talking about advanced manufacturing because I have a similar and a related question on the Army Transformation Initiative. So first of all, Secretary Driscoll, General George, thank you. Good to see you both again. And thank you to you and your families for your continued service. Secretary Driscoll, is it, in reference to the Army Transformation Initiative, is it correct that it is consistent with the Secretary of Defense's directive on Army transformation and acquisition reform? That those things are consistent? Okay, yes. Thank you.
Yes.
And that directive states that the Army must prioritize investments in existing resources to improve electronic warfare capabilities, among other things. Is that correct?
Yes, I believe so.
Yeah, thank you. And I agree. I mean, lessons learned from the conflict in Ukraine especially do underscore the requirement for just how important our offensive and defensive electronic warfare capabilities are. We've seen that on the battlefield in Europe. So it seems to me that the Army would want to bolster its electronic warfare test and evaluation capabilities. Senator Slotkin talked about advanced manufacturing. One aspect of being able to manufacture advanced, innovative combat power is to be able to test it and evaluate it. Without test and evaluation, you don't know what you're going to get. So we want to ensure that we can deliver the most advanced warfighting capabilities in any conflict. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
So it's concerning to me that the U.S. Army Test and Evaluation Command, ATEC, has a reduction in force plan that would disproportionately impact the Army's primary electronic warfare test and evaluation center, and that is the Electronic Proving Ground at Fort Huachuca, outside of Sierra Vista in Arizona. The Electronic Proving Ground provides the unique capability to execute electronic warfare developmental testing without interference due to its unique geography. It sits in a bowl surrounded by some mountains. It also benefits from an ideal climate. There's over 320 flying days per year in federally protected airspace, which further minimizes interference and allowing us to conduct aggressive, offensive EW jamming tests that really show off our capability. This is important developmental test. The existing ATEC proving grounds simply cannot provide the same environments outside of Fort Huachuca. That would leave us without the ability, if we get rid of personnel at Fort Huachuca at the electronic proving ground, we will not have the capability to do that developmental test and to train our soldiers and pilots how to use these systems. to counter our adversaries. So if carried out, this reduction in force at EPG, this could result in some long-term consequences for testing and evaluation and readiness. So, Mr. Secretary, do you agree that disproportionately slashing our electronic warfare test centers would harm the Army's electronic warfare capability?
Do you mind if I jump in on this one, Senator?
Yes, sir.
As you know, we also have Yuma that's over there. We have
Yuma,
White,
Yuma
White
Proving
Sands,
Ground.
Dugway. So that I agree with you. I agree with you on the EW. I agree with you. And what we've looked at, and I know Pat Gaydon at the Army Test and Evaluation, we've had a lot of discussions on this. We are also testing some of this stuff around the world. What we had was, and we are looking at, is where do we have excess capacity that we're actually not using that? I think we can come over and lay that out. So yes, EW is going to be important. Yes, we're going to have to do it in a lot of different locations. What I will tell you is probably we will be doing much differently at the John R. Fox range, and what's happening is adding drones, adding FPV drones, and doing different
General,
training.
let me give you a quick example, though, and obviously Yuma Proving Ground, also a valuable Army asset in the state of Arizona. They are different. The geography of the electronic proving ground allows us to do stuff there that we cannot do anywhere else. If you want to simulate a surface-to-air missile system, the electronic signature from it in Yuma Proving Ground, you're talking about maybe 0.1 watt of power output before you can start to interfere with communication systems, airplanes, TV stations in and around the Phoenix area. When you do that at the electronic proving ground, you can go an order of magnitude or more higher in power output. There's no place like it anywhere. And the RIF that is planned at ATEC is if that continues and is carried out, we are going to find ourselves in a situation where we cannot do the testing that we need on these EW systems. So General and Mr. Secretary, I encourage you to look into this. And I am happy to have a follow-up discussion with you about it.
Senator, and I visited there, and I can echo that the work they're doing is incredible, but we'll follow up with your office.
Thank you.
Senator Kelly, I believe you're accompanied by your brother.
Yes.
Who is also an astronaut.
And a Navy former naval pilot.
Fighter pilot,
yes.
combat
he is in the audience.
He is in the audience.
Here.
He bears a striking resemblance to you.
He does.
Yes, thank you.
We're twins. I'm the original, and he's the cheap copy.
Okay, you're number one, he's number two.
That's correct.
Okay, well, oh, good. But let me salute a family of aviators and astronauts.
Hear, hear. And this concludes the open portion of today's hearing. I want to thank our witnesses for their testimony, for the information of members. Question for the record will be due to the committee within 2 business days of the conclusion of the hearing. We will commence the closed portion of this hearing in the Senate Security in 15 minutes. We are recessed until then.